At the turn of the century, wristwatches were becoming increasingly popular for both men and women. At the end of the First World War, this only became more prevalent. But along with innovation came horror, pain, and unspeakable suffering that left a dark stain on the watch industry, highlighted corporate greed, and shone a light on safety practices in the USA. Today, we're going to be talking about the Radium Girls. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Vintage Warlock channel. I hope you are all safe and well. As we continue our dive into the history of horology with brands, products and of course important figures, I wanted to deviate a little and talk about an often forgotten but equally important part of our history. Those of you who know the story will no doubt understand how truly tragic this is. For those of you who are not, well, viewer discretion is advised. So, let's dig into it. For almost a decade, between 1917 and 1926, the US Radium Corporation, known for short as the USRC, hired approximately 70 women to work in their factories for the purpose of handling radium. This radium would be packaged and sent to the corporations in both the US and Canada, where an estimated 4,000 workers would begin the process of applying luminous materials to watch dials and handsets. Now, before we go any further, I feel it's important for you to know what radium is. Radium is also known as the symbol Ra, with the atomic number 88. It is the sixth element in group 2 of the periodic table. All of the isotopes in the radium are highly radioactive and therefore considered extremely dangerous. Exposure to radium, internal or external, will cause cancer and other disorders. In fact, when ingested, 80% of radium leaves the body through feces, but the remaining 20% goes straight into the bloodstream, mostly accumulating in bones. Some of the biological effects from radium include radium dermatitis. This was first discovered in 1900, 2 years after the element's first discovery. A French physicist carried a small ampoule of radium in his waistcoat pocket for 6 hours and reported that his skin had become ulcerated afterwards. Pierre and Marie Curie, also intrigued by radium and what it does, unwittingly sacrificed their lives trying to learn more about it. It is considered to be one of the most toxic and dangerous radio elements in existence today. And that's what these workers, mostly women, were exposed to on a daily basis. The rate of pay for a radium girl was about £1.50 per dial. And in total, these ladies would be expected to paint around 250 dials per day. These ladies would not only hand paint the dial, but would often mix the radium with paint and lick the paintbrushes between applications. This alone would expose the women to lethal levels of radiation over a sustained period. This was even encouraged by the supervisors and managers at the time, with the slogan and phrase, lip, dip, paint. Finally, the girls would often apply radium as a substitute for lipstick, nail polish, and even on their teeth, as the glow from the material would make them shine and give them a radiant smile. In fact, prolonged exposure to radium dust in the factory would even make their clothes, hair, and even skin glow. Naively, and somewhat ironically, these girls would be given the title of the Ghost Girls because of it, and not because of what happened next. However, there were those who didn't revel in delight at the substance and the way it looked on them, and instead questioned the nature of radium and whether it was safe to use. However, they were assured that it was safe and there was nothing to be worried about by upper management and the business owners. These girls trusted them completely and as such dutifully carried on with their work. Of course, given what we know now about radium, that was far from the truth, and prolonged exposure to radium had taken its toll. Among the first of these was a lady called Amelia Maggia, simply known as Molly to her friends. The first symptom was toothache, which required an extraction. Soon, the next tooth had to be extracted as well. This would lead to painful ulcers which would regularly bleed and were full of pus in the place where her teeth once had been. This spread through Molly's mouth and lower jaw, which ultimately had to be removed along with other body parts. On the 12th of September 1922, 100 years ago this year, Molly passed away due to a massive hemorrhage. This terrible, long, slow and painful death would be the fate of many women who worked at the factory. The radium poisoning would cause dental pain, tooth loss, radium jaw, a condition where the jaw simply rots away, lesions and ulcers, anemia, bone fractures, and finally necrosis as the body slowly decomposes with the person very much alive. It is hard to think of a worse condition. The pain must have been excruciating, and in 1927 over 50 workers had died from exposure and hundreds more were falling ill. It had become too big to cover up. It would later be found that supervisors, managers and business owners knew the toxic effects of radium. In fact, it was often reported in inquiries that they would actively avoid the factory floor unless absolutely necessary and avoid handling the radium at all costs. Being more concerned by the product and its reputation as a brand, at the urging of companies, workers' causes of death would be labelled by doctors as syphilis, a notorious sexually transmitted infection at the time, and was often cited in attempts to callously smear the reputations of the women that had unfortunately died at the factory. Despite the ensuing media coverage and the well-known abuse against workers to add injury to insult, many women would initially find it hard to get legal representation, as most lawyers would not be willing to take on the USRC and other watch companies. However, despite this, plant worker Grace Fryer decided to sue. But it would take 2 years for her to find a lawyer willing to take on the USRC. And after she found a lawyer, the litigation process was slow moving. At their first appearance in court in January 1928, 2 of the women were bedridden and none of them could raise their arms to take an oath. A total of 5 factory workers, Grace Fryer, Edna Husman, Catherine Schwab, and sisters Quinta MacDonald and Albina Lawrence, dubbed the Radium Girls, had joined this suit. The litigation and media sensation surrounding the case established legal precedents and triggered the enactment of regulations governing labour safety standards, including a baseline of provable suffering. But that's not all. In Illinois, employees began asking for compensation for their medical and dental bills as early as 1927, but were refused by management. The demand for money by sick and dying former employees continued into the mid-1930s before a suit was brought before the Illinois Industrial Commission, or the IIC. This would go all the way to the Supreme Court in October 1939, and amazingly, despite the mountain of evidence, the court decided not to hear the appeals. But in the end, after the case had been won no less than 8 times by the USRC, they would finally be forced to pay. In the end, the surviving Radium Girls would be given $10,000, the equivalent to $158,000 in today's money each, and a $600 per year annuity, which is the equivalent to around $9,500 in today's money. This would be paid at $12 a week until they died. Further to this, all medical and legal expenses incurred by the girls would be paid by the USRC. Furthermore, the Radium Girls saga holds an important place in the history of both fields of health physics and the labour rights movements. The lawsuit would set the groundwork for the occupational disease labour law, and finally radium painters would be issued with proper safety equipment and PPE, the result of which would avoid many deaths until radium paint was no longer used on dials in favour of things like tritium, quartz light and loom in the 1970s. Today you can find books and films relating to the story online. I've included some of the affiliate links to them below. I'm not going to ask if you liked the video today, but if you did get something out of it, please click the like button. And also don't forget to share and subscribe to this channel. In addition to the historical content like this, I regularly post watch reviews, brand rankings, and top 10, sometimes top 12 videos on all the watches and all things horology. I try and do an average of 1 to 2 videos per week. Sometimes I may do more if I've got the time. Don't forget to use the affiliate links for the video below. All commissions paid to the channel don't cost you any extra, but it does support the channel and helps me create more videos just like this one. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram, links below. Stay safe, everyone, and I'll see you all next time.
I would say Margaret was my closest friend. And she went with when I was going with the boyfriend, they were cousins. We both went. She went with one and I went with the other one. And she was my best friend. And she was a good worker too. And then before I knew it, she got sick and had the broken jawbone. It never healed. In 2 years, she was dead.
Peg's trouble started when she had a tooth pulled, and it wouldn't heal. It was all honeycombed from the radium. The tooth never did heal.
This is my sister. How she looked at 17 before she went to work at the Radium dial, and she looked a picture of health. She was such a pretty girl.
Red hair.
This is a picture of her, how she looked just a couple weeks before she passed away with her boyfriend Chuck, with some of the smaller children. When she'd come home after work, she would have to lay down and rest. I can see her walking down the street. She limped. It all seemed to settle in her hip. Of course, it was all through her bones.